welcome to the Set Apart Podcast, my listeners. And I am sitting here smiling because you know I got my girl who is with me several times, Miss Urena Ricks Johnson. But I got my other girl who's here with me now, Miss Lisa Griffey. And we're back. Guess what? We're on the Kingdom Voting and Politics again. Now, when you watched us in part one, we were videoed. So you were able to see all of our beautiful faces. But this time, we're doing audio because I know you're listening anyway. And so we're going to talk about kingdom, voting, and politics. And as I explained to you earlier, the reason we're doing this is because we want you to be an educated voter. We realize that so often, and I am guilty, but I won't be guilty this time, that we hear certain issues and we are not well informed, and that's how we place our vote. And then when we place our vote simply for a couple of issues, we really are not doing a service to ourselves or the families or the community or the country as a whole. And we're just helping to muffle things up. So we want to be educated voters. And so what we're going to do is before, and I'm saying as before, as if I'm taking it that you've already listened to the podcast. So if you haven't, you need to listen to the Kingdom Voting and Politics Part 1. And now we're moving into Part 2. We started the foundation on the first one, just kind of educating you on the roles and responsibilities, and we talked about certain issues. Now we're moving more into some other things. We're trying to bring up the popular subjects that everyone is talking about, okay, so that you'll really know the truth. We're going to tell the truth here, I told you. Right here, we tell the truth. This whole podcast is centered around the Word of God and what He says. And I always told you, if you disagree or you think I say something out of the way, feel free to email me at goshenplenty@gmail.com. Okay? So I feel like I'm listening to you say, okay, like I'm standing up talking in front of an audience. But what I'm going to do now is go back to the same scripture. We're going to still stay the same way we were with the first one. Okay? So the scripture for today is coming from Proverbs 29:2. Show me a righteous ruler, and I will show you a happy people. Show me a wicked ruler, and you will be a miserable people. So, where are we, America? Tell me where we are right now. Just put that thought in your head, okay? Now, Rena, you ready?
I'm ready.
You ready, Lisa?
I think so.
Lisa's new to this, everybody. So she's gonna get in where she feel like she got a word to say, but I do want to hear your voice.
A little bit.
Okay. All right. So what we're gonna do on this one is we're gonna talk about a few things that we hear a lot of people talk about. Listeners, we do have a lot of misinformation out there. So we're going to give you as much of the facts as we know. And we're not saying that we know everything, but I am saying that I do have enough sense to have my people on podcasts who know enough to tell you what's real and what's not, okay? So, Urena, we're going to get to the famous thing that we said we were going to leave off on, and that's the student loans, girl.
Okay. Every time I get the notification, sometimes I want to cry. Think about how much I owe and, how that kind of lingers on. And I'm the first generation of my family to actually go to college. So that opportunity to go to college and to advance in career in my family, my parents wanted to make sure that that's what me and my brothers did, that we went to college. But the burden of student loan debt, a lot of people deal with it. And you think about it, I almost think like, I'm just going to, have to live with this until I die, with that payment, unfortunately. And that's what a lot of Americans deal with. So when we heard President Biden addressing that, and first of all, I want to say that I commend President Biden for actually even addressing the student loan dilemma and the fact that it faces a lot of Americans, and that we go for higher education and think about that's the American dream, to go to college and get a good job. How many of us were told by our parents, grandparents, like, you get the opportunities that we didn't have. You get to go to college. But what they don't tell you is about, the things that you face in college. And Lisa and I were talking about earlier, even credit card debt, they, you on college campus, they give you a backpack. They say, sign up for this Discover card. And you sign up, you don't even have a job,
Right.
So those are things that we're not really taught about, like financial management, or even when it says sign up for those loans and student loans, and then we don't really realize that, even if you don't have the job, that dream job, those student loans every month, you're still getting that bill. And a lot of times it just can be very overwhelming. So, like I said, first of all, I commend President Biden for just addressing that. But I think that we need to be educated enough to know that, as I stated in the previous podcast, the president is the figurehead. So, of course, if he's going to address a lot of issues, we oftentimes think that with him addressing it, that he's going to be able to implement it day one in office. He's going to come in, and that's the first thing he's going to sign. Eliminate all student loans, because he addressed that. But that's unrealistic. And we have to understand that he still has to go through a process, that we live in what we talked about last time, which is a democracy. We have 3 branches of government. We have the Congress, which is the House of Representatives, and the Senate. We have the judicial branch. And we also have the executive branch, which is the president. So if he has an agenda, he sets out his agenda, and that he wants to do certain things and certain policies, but he can't sign an executive order and eliminate student loan debt. If you look at now the approval rating, they talk about on the news, the approval rating of President Biden is down because of the student loan promise. And I think that we need to be educated enough to know that's not necessarily a bad promise that he did not fulfill, because if we think about it, some student loans he has eliminated. For schools that have closed, there has been elimination of some student loans that can happen, that this administration has done within their power. But as far as totally eliminated at a certain level student loans, that has to be passed by Congress. And that has to go through Congress in order to be a legitimate law, which allows you to, after a certain period of time, to eliminate your student loan debt, or student loan debt that is eliminated based on the fact if you never got your degree. Things of that nature that needs to be policy or written law, as opposed to just something that's just a promise. So, like I said, I commend President Biden for that, but just understanding that that should not be a deal breaker in our support of a political party. What I'm saying is that don't just base on your dislike of a political party based on the fact that you didn't think that he fulfilled that promise.
Yes.
And you just have to be realistic. I mean, do you really think that he can just get in office and just immediately make something happen just because that's what you want? Like you said, it's a process, and it's a governmental process. It's not just going to happen overnight just because, that's what you want and make you feel better.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So knowing what your senators believe concerning the student loans, if that's important to you, knowing what they believe, knowing what the upcoming election we had, the primary election, how many voted in that primary election, that was crucial. A lot of people just, kind of let that pass, and wasn't really a lot of talk about it. But those are key things, those key positions that are even in your local area that were up for election. And are we paying attention to those things? Because that's how we get policies that really matter to the everyday person. It's not in the bigger elections. It's in those primary, and it's in this midterm election that's going to be so crucial in November.
And we have to be active voters. You can't complain about things if you won't even vote.
That's true.
But that's a whole nother subject.
That's
And
true.
then understanding, like we said before, the president sets the agenda when he's running for president, right? But if the House majority is that with an agenda that's different from his, then he's not going to have all of those things that he promised to happen. So that's why it's important that we vote in those midterm elections. We have, 56 Senate seats coming up?
Yes.
We need to be out there, and we need to be supporting. If President Biden, because he's the president right now, has an agenda that you would like to see happen, then you need to be out there voting in the midterms and selecting those that are running for the Senate seats that have that same agenda that he has, so that the things that you would like to see happen to take place. So I'm just saying, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I'm not voting this way, or that way because they didn't do this and they didn't do that. Well, it's just like going to your parents and saying, hey, I'd like to have this happen. He's basically saying, hey, here's my agenda, guys. Would you read it and please, help to approve this so that I can make it happen? If his support within the House is not there to help him make his agenda happen, it's not going to happen. So therefore, it's not the president's fault. Any president for any agenda.
And it's 2 years. We have 2 more years of, under this administration.
Yes.
And just know that when they're making these decisions, there is a give and take. Nobody is going to get, you're not going to get everything that you want out out of the agenda. Even when they pass a law, there's going to be certain concessions. That's when you hear them talking about the debate on the floor. You hear things concerning those lingos because you're not going to get everything out of the law that's passed. But it's a lot of it. It has to do with concessions. A lot of it has to do with different things and different topics that one party has to give up for the other. That's democracy. We shouldn't be such an emotional voter. Like, this is a clause where I'm going to vote this way out of emotion because they didn't go the way I wanted them to go on one issue. Because we see certain things in the media, we're just like, well, I'm just not going to vote, or I'm going to vote a certain way based on you to get one thing, and then now you're just upset.
You're mad.
You know, now you're just upset. We can't be those type of voters. Well, we're hoping that we're not those type of voters.
Right. And I'm just going to say, I have a big student loan. But here's the thing. This is the way I thought about it. Would I love for them to get rid of student loans? Absolutely, because I would love to have that opportunity to not have to pay my student loan back. But when I got that student loan, I signed that contract. I signed that dotted line, and I agreed to pay it. So at the end of the day, would I be kind of disappointed if I did have to pay it, rather? Yes, I would. But that's what I said I would do.
Yes.
So I'm going to do it. But I really hope that they do.
Exactly.
I hope that they do get rid of
Right, but
student
it's
loans.
not a deal breaker
But it's
for you.
not a
You're
deal
not.
breaker for me. And then in my voting, I wouldn't pick just that one issue, because when I vote, I look at the big picture of things. And that's what we often don't do. Like you said, we become emotional voters. Let me give you another thought, listeners. This is what I said last at our part 1. And I think this is I really like this thought because it really makes sense. It says, the two most dangerous things on the planet is sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity, from the words of Martin Luther King. Meditate on that one. I want to know where you fall. I said it. And so we talked about student loans, because I know you all talk about student loans a lot. Okay, that is what you're focused on for your choices and why you vote and how you vote. Now, I'm hearing a lot of people say that. So now we're going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about the child separation policy, immigration.
Yes, immigration is a major issue, and I think it came to the forefront under the Trump administration more, and because of the media. We live in a social media, we live in a media-driven society where, these issues, and just know, child separation from their families at the border, that didn't start with the Trump administration. That's still misinformation. It did not start with Trump. It just was more of the forefront because, think about it during the pandemic. We were all at home. We were watching the media more. We were, it was more in front of us and more for us to deal with and look at, So under that administration, it was more of, we were trying to keep things under wrap, and they had more laws in place because we were trying to monitor COVID. We were trying to make sure that we weren't letting a lot of people in to the United States because COVID was rampant at that time. So, in the media, you saw, a lot of times where, people were separated at the border because they were sending people back. Problem came in when they weren't allowed to actually seek asylum first before you remove them, or seek, seeing what they were fleeing from. And in certain countries, you are allowed to just flee or just come over here. As in certain European countries, you're allowed to come over here and seek a better life, and you don't have those restrictions. So I think the issue comes in with the separation and the policy is that if you're going to implement a policy across the board. It shouldn't just be for certain border. And the Mexican border, we're separating families. We don't want them in. And with the European countries, we don't mind people coming in and hoping to seek for a better life. And so I think that we need to address that separation policy, and I'm hoping that Congress will pass a more universal law concerning immigration. And I do think that we need to look into the fact, now that COVID is a little bit more under control, that now we can really find out if the people that are trying to cross over into the United States, if they have a legitimate reason or legitimate fear from the country where they're fleeing from, because that has always been a place where the United States has been a place where we welcome people. We are pretty much a land of immigrants, if we want to be honest.
We're a
We are a
melting
land, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, we are a land of immigrants. So we have to understand that these policies are in place to allow people to seek a better life or seek refuge, but we cannot have a policy based on a discriminatory policy. And I think currently we do have that base because we are targeting, and I think that's what was in the media so much, because you saw a lot of families that were from, let's say, Mexico and some of these third world countries that were trying to flee, where they were being abused, they were being terrorized and things of that nature. And really we had set up policies like asylum or seeking asylum for them in order to see about becoming towards citizenship with the United States. But we kind of stopped that policy during COVID. And it was a legitimate reason because we were trying to protect the United States from COVID. We didn't really want to have that melting pot because we were trying to get the disease under control here in the United States. So I definitely understand trying to do something as an emergency precaution, but I think that it affected certain people, impoverished people more than it affected others. And I think that now that we have COVID under control more, we need to examine that policy. We need to examine the policies of asylum, making it more available for individuals. We need to see why were we separating people at the border from their parents. I know that there was some footage of officers riding around on horses, pretty much whipping and really pretty much doing things to these immigrants as they were trying to come over. Now, that type of activity should not be. There is ways for you to keep people out without degrading them.
Yes.
So I think from that, it should be strict policies in place where there's a way that we need to protect our country. I'm not saying we should not, but it should not be inhumane. And I think that the policies that have been going forward has been inhumane, and we need to really examine that.
So what I think I'm hearing you say is, now in Monica's words,
Yeah.
okay?
I
in
want you to
Monica's
give-
words, is that we need to reevaluate the policy to make sure that we're not using it in a discriminative manner.
Yes.
We are a melting pot, and so we need to make sure the reasons that we're doing it is not just basically from our own personal biases.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing you say. So you know what? I'm telling you, believers, it's okay to be knowledgeable as a believer and even involved in what's going on so that you can be a educated voter. What we're doing now is trying to educate you. In my almost 60 years, no one has ever had a full agenda that I liked, that I approved of. So I always often selected based off of the agenda of what's best for my family and the country. And so that's why I am doing this podcast, because I want you all to make an informed decision, because in Hosea 4:6, he said, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." We are all sitting here, even around this table. We love the Lord and we are believers. So I don't want you to be in lack of knowledge. And then I have a couple of points real quick that I want to tell you about God calling and using political leaders. He had Joseph, whose brothers sold him into slavery for 13 years, and they feared him, and he became the second most powerful man in Egypt. We had Mordecai in the book of Esther, who was dressed in royal robes and given great authority in Persia. We have Daniel, a captive in Babylon, who saw his obedience to trust God and leading God to ruling the entire province. He used the Pharaoh. See, he takes good ones and bad ones, He used the Pharaoh in Exodus, in Egypt. He used Herod when Jesus was born. And then he used the Romans, who tried to destroy Christianity at one point. So it's nothing wrong, believers, to, know enough about the political aspect to be able to cast your vote. And how do you not know that God didn't even call you to take a political position? You don't know that. But you allow God to be first in your life, and he will direct and see you through it, in an appropriate manner. Because remember, we're in the world, but not of the world. So, okay, I just had to say that. Okay, I just had to say that because I
Love
had to
it.
tie that in. So, anyway, now, because we got a few more good stuff here that I know you guys want to hear us talk about, but I'm trying to do the soft stuff first, and then I'll do the good stuff last. It's all good. Okay, so the truth about the taxes, okay, and how will it suppress those of lower economic status?
The American dream, I think we've kind of talked about that before, is, a lot of us, come from poor to middle class families, that were right above the poverty line, and that, we live in Michigan where the jobs of working in the plant provided a lot of the middle class life for a lot of families. But a lot of the tax benefits and tax breaks, historically has not been available for that middle class to get someone up from the low class to the middle class has been kind of hard to achieve based on from the tax perspective, because it seems that the middle class sometimes gets taxed the most, from that standpoint. And the reason why we're breaking this down is because a lot of times people are voting based on the tax benefits. And I'm just talking just in general from the Republican standpoint. I heard a lot of people say that they didn't necessarily like all of the agenda necessarily of former President Donald Trump, but they knew because he was big business, he was out to protect the taxes for people that were over a certain tax bracket. And that was his agenda, because he rode on the fact that he was a businessman. So they did not want a political person. They wanted a business person that understood and that would allow them to have the most tax breaks. So a lot of people, even though they didn't like any of the other agenda, they voted strictly for President Trump, former President Trump, based on his agenda for tax, because he was protecting their wealth.
The rich.
He was he was protecting. So he was trying to create a class of either a poor class or rich. Totally eliminating the middle class.
Yeah.
But if you look at people that are in Congress, and I'm not necessarily endorsing Senator Sanders, but if you look at a lot of his agenda and his policy, he really, really talks about, from an educational standpoint, middle class values and trying to protect that. You will listen to him, because he has a lot of things to say, and a lot of agendas that he's pushed in Congress has been based on promoting and making sure that the middle class stays intact. And understanding that a lot of times that we have progressed past what of our generation before us probably never thought that they would achieve. But we are taxed. If you reach that tax bracket, you are taxed probably at the most highest rate. Based on the middle class, is because they're really trying to eliminate that class. It's either going to be two types of class, and they disguise it by saying we don't want socialism. They don't want everybody to be on the same playing field. They don't want everybody to be. There's the powers that be that just want to stay rich, and
Of course.
that's what you want to do. You want to stay, but if you stay rich, that means that somebody has to be poor.
They don't care about that.
They don't care. And then, but the sad part about it is that I don't want it to be confused with it, because a lot of times people confuse it with religion, and they'll say, well, the Bible says, the poor will be with you always. We're not saying that there are not people that are going to be poor, things of that nature, but we have to be able to say that we are trying to help a group of people or individuals within America that are trying to rise above that class in order to at least to make it to that middle class. And we're not taxing them at the highest level. And you need to know, what does your senator, what does your state representative believe concerning taxes? You need to know that. Do you know how your senator from Michigan is voting on that? And like I said, we're not trying to sway you in any way. All the listeners who are listening to us probably have different classes where you live or where you're at from a social economic perspective. But you have to understand that you need to be educated on what your senator, your House of Representative, your representative, what do they believe on tax, on the tax perspective? So that way you know how they're voting. And if it's not agreeing with what you agree with, then you need to cast your vote and not vote for them in November.
That's right. And so, once again, you got to look at all of the nuggets. You have to look at all of the nuggets. Everything we're talking about are things that could impact your household, your life. And then I always think of the people as a whole. So you do your research. Go in there. Look, we don't have elections 365 days a year. And just like you research social media and you stay on Instagram and you on Facebook saying stuff that I get tired of looking at, okay? Do your research. This is election time. It's time for you to research and make sure that you are an educated voter. That is so important. Okay, so now we're going to move on to get this. This has been a big thing, and this is like a kind of which one should I do first? 13 or 12? Well, we'll start with 13, then we'll go back to 12. Okay, the overturn of abortion, Roe versus Wade. And then I have dash women and poor.
Ooh.
So, what's going on with Roe versus Wade? Kind of give a
This is major. Roe versus Wade, that being overturned throughout our lifetime is major legislation and major things that have affected, and like we talked about, affected from the low class to the rich and famous. This is across the board, affecting the rights and the privileges for women. And I want to say this, I just want to go on record to say that I am pro-life. I'm not pro-birth. I'm pro-life, and we'll talk about that difference. I am definitely pro-life. I believe that life begins at conception. I just want to go on record to say that. And I also understand that, as we talked about the scripture, I also understand that the Bible talks about the heart of the king being in His hand, and how He can, God controls legislation. He controls all of those things. So I do believe that He sets people in place, just like I believe that President Biden was selected by God to be our president. Just like if I believe that, then I have to believe that President Trump was. So we have to be across the board. We can't just be. We can't just say President Trump was sent by God, and then just say President Biden was sent by the devil. That's not. That's not
exactly.
That's not the same thing. If we believe that the Lord sets the order and sets people in place, then we have to believe that all the presidents that He set in place, He set them in place. I'm gonna get that disclaimer first, and then I'm gonna go on to say that Roe versus Wade is really about the rights of women in order to make that choice. To make the choice of whether, given their situation, making the choice on whether to have an abortion or not. So with that being said, I am pro-life, but I am pro-choice of that woman. I believe that a woman should be able to make the right to choose.
Yeah.
And we, as the church and as the people of God, I'm going to show them love regardless of whatever that choice is. And I feel like my job as a woman of God is to show them that love, is to show them who God is, and show them that they can make the choice, and they can make the right choice. And what I may feel is the right choice at that time in order to keep that baby. Or at that time, or depending upon the advice that I would give them. But definitely, like I said, I am pro-life. But I believe that it's ultimately that woman's choice.
Absolutely.
And I believe that we can't change the heart of people. We have to show them God. And their heart is changed by their choices that they make. And I really see that Roe v. Wade has affected and will affect women of color and poor women the most adversely. Because of the resources. Because you're not saying with the overturn of Roe v. Wade that you're going to provide more resources for that woman if she decides to make that decision to have that kid. These are the same people that are cutting funding for children, are cutting preschool funding, are cutting funding for kids to actually, have resources that they needed resources. But yet you're forcing that woman or even that child. Let's be honest. We have forcing young children that end up getting pregnant for whatever reason to have this baby, but you're not providing that woman with resources. So in that instance, you're not really pro-life, you're pro-birth. You're forcing that woman or that young girl to have the child, but you're not providing that resources for that child or that woman to have the quality of life that they deserve by having that child.
Yeah, as believers, it can be a torn situation for us because I don't agree with abortion when you are using it as a means of birth control.
Exactly.
That's when your
Yeah.
choices, that's when you're making like truly wrong choices. But when I think about the 10-year-old who was brutally raped and then she was pregnant and then they were trying to go across, and this really happened, go across state lines so that she could have an abortion because it wasn't allowed in her state. So you have a 10-year-old who has, and I deal with women in trauma. So the trauma is she was raped. Then the trauma is she's pregnant. And now the trauma is you're telling her that she has to keep the baby. And then, so now she's got the trauma of being 10 and pregnant, delivering the baby,
Yes.
okay, and then giving the baby up for adoption. And then that's the woman that I see in my center. Now she's full of trauma. Or I have a true story, all of these are true stories. I have a good friend who had cancer and was pregnant, and it was aggressive, and it was a choice to abort
Yeah.
or either carry through and then die. So she aborted so that she could get her treatment, and now she has 3 children. You know, abortion
But
was
what
not,
if that wasn't?
but what if that
it wasn't offered to her,
it wasn't offered to her
or
at that
she had to
time.
have that baby
Yeah.
and end up losing her life. You know, so you're
But then
basically
here's a
you're not
baby
pro,
out here.
but you're basically, like I said, you're pro birth. You want that birth of that baby, but then as soon as that baby gets here, where are the resources? Where are the community that you're saying that you want to create by saying that this baby has to live? That you provide those resources or those things for that baby in order to survive and to thrive.
And because she had extenuating circumstances, she should be allowed to make the choice to have an abortion.
Right.
You know, she had cancer.
Right.
So you're going to tell her, oh, no, you can't have an abortion. So now she's trying to deal with possibly losing her life and being pregnant at the same time.
And could die in the midst of the pregnancy.
Exactly.
You just never know. And then another, you know, I see it all the time. A young woman who was constantly raped by her father. And she still to this day has not recovered from that. But they did not even send him to prison until she got pregnant. But she was able to abort. So those are things that as a woman of God makes me torn because I look at those different situations and I say, you know, God has set the stage for us to make choices, and the choices that we make are between God and I. Am I right or wrong?
Yes.
Am I right? But I'm totally against it in a stance of using it as a means of birth control.
Of course.
But I think that there are some circumstances that are so severe that we may have to revisit. You know, is this really the right thing to do to overturn this? You know, I don't know. It's
And the
deep.
government should not be able to
Yeah.
make that. Each situation that we've mentioned are different situations, and it's not something that the law or legislators should be debating.
Yeah.
To me, that
exactly.
should be a issue where a woman is going over that with people that are trying to counsel them. They should be going over that with if they are connected
With
to
your
their
doctor,
church,
your
their doctor,
your husband, your
you said
significant other.
Those are things that from a legislative policy issue that should not even be discussed within the legislatures. You gotta have people that have no touch with what a woman would ever go through making these decisions.
No touch with reality. I mean, overturning Roe versus Wade is taking women back decades. So now you're going to have women and young girls now trying to get an abortion in someone's basement again,
Like they
trying to
used
and
to.
possibly harming themselves. Now you're dying because you're trying to get an abortion for legitimate reasons, not just because it's a method of birth control, but maybe you were raped or you are in some sort of trauma and you're trying to get a legitimate abortion and now it's illegal.
And these resources for getting an abortion, like that's why we talked about women, you know, oftentimes women in impoverished situations, they're doing the things that you're talking about, as opposed to someone who has, you know, if
Healthcare.
their state
Yeah.
does not provide it, they can go, you know, outside the state or even to another country.
Well, they say
where
rich women are doing that.
Yes.
Well, they do that now to save face because they don't want to say, "Oh, my
They'll just
15-year-old
send them-
daughter
yeah.
got pregnant, so we're going to go to Italy and get the abortion.
and then just come back like nothing happened. So it doesn't affect them as it would affect someone who without the resources. So
Yes.
you're overturning this, and you're not giving the resources, and you're not giving the education, you're not providing the support to that. You say, make excuses and say women that have been raped, they have kids, and the kids end up being doctors, they end up being this whatever. But the trauma of what that woman or that young girl had to go through, that's still lingering on with that woman. So she has to deal with that. Even if, God blesses that child, and that child becomes, so it never has to deal with the trauma, or never has to, but you're still leaving that woman with that trauma, and you have not given her the adequate resources, or even the adequate ability to be able to deal with that. And you just swept it under the rug. It just says you don't have any control over that decision. You already don't have any control over, especially if you were assaulted or
Yes.
within that situation. You had no control over that. Now you have control over your whole body when it comes to, I'm going to force you to have this child.
So God gave us the ability to make choices, right? So then they're trying to take us away from that ability to make choices, right? I'm just asking you all. I don't know. And then I noticed that a lot of the people that other believers that I hear that are so
Okay.
against, believe that the Roe versus Wade should be overturned. And even the people making the decisions, a lot of people that make the decisions for you, they have never been in those shoes or never seen it, so they don't have a
that's the
clue. I
thing.
see it every day on in my work, on my watch. So you can't tell me that this is just, I don't know, maybe I'm rambling now. Hey, look, but I might be rambling, but I don't know. I just think that the ability to choose is crucial, and then let that be between that person and God.
But I get what the church is saying, because the Bible is clear about the shedding of innocent blood.
Right,
I believe that a lot of the things that we have dealt with is because of we have allowed the abortions to happen. We've allowed women to just take the even how the generations and even our generation sometimes feels about even just getting pregnant, that you can just go and you just have those choices and just go ahead and do that.
Well,
And
that's using it as a mean of birth control.
and you're not thinking about it. So I get that the thing about it, but I understand that from that perspective as a woman of God, and as I'm going to tell the truth that that is that it should not be used as a form of birth control.
Yeah.
That it should not. You have a choice, and you have that ability to be able to say that God, has honored the fact that you are trying to do the right thing, even if you decide to keep it, but it should still be your choice, though. And I understand that a lot of things that have come on America has been because of the choices that we've made. So educating people that God is not, He's not just a God that just He loves everybody. Yes, He does, but there is a lot of judgment that has come on us because of those choices. But understanding and letting people know that God is just not a God that just yes, He loves everybody, but we do have what we sow, we reap. So I understand teaching that. I understand, letting people know that, but we have to understand that we still have to show them that love, because they're not where we're at. And a lot of times I think that what they see from the church is just all the condemnation. They see you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, should do this, but they're not seeing that the love of God constrains people. And the Bible is clear. If we lift Him up, He'll draw people. And we can't save people. We can't, whatever we do, it has to be God that draws the heart and convicts people to repentance. And I think that sometimes what we try to do is we try to do it with the law.
Oh yeah.
And the law does not reap that. You see what I'm saying? You can't police morality. You can't police, if they don't have a change of heart, It don't matter what you say to them. It don't matter what you make illegal, because it is shown that even if you make abortions illegal, they still gonna do it.
Yes. They'll
Unless you
find a
change
way.
the heart,
They'll find a way.
unless you show them the love of God, that they have that choice, that they have to have a change of heart. And if they don't have that change of heart, they're still going to do what they want to do.
Okay, so now this is what I'm gonna tell you what I hear. Okay, so ultimately I think about, in the Word of God, when the Ten Commandments are made to remind us of the sins that we're doing. But ultimately, he said he was going to implant that word in our hearts, correct? He said he was going to do that. So therefore, if we have a change of heart and we understand what the Word of God has instructed us, then we're going to pay attention to being responsible and prayerfully not make those choices of getting pregnant, having to use an abortion as a means of birth control because now we don't want to be pregnant, because we're going to realize what God said in his word, and our heart is going to be different. So we're going to be responsible and we're going to make right choices.
But even if I make the wrong choice, God still, there is forgiveness there.
Exactly.
But you still have to live and reap. So there are some things you're still going to have to, because still you sown that seed of having that abortion. That doesn't go away.
Oh, no,
You
it
see what I'm
doesn't
saying?
go away.
That doesn't, so there's going to be some things that you're going to have to go through and experience. So those are things that we're going to let you know you're going to have to experience some things, but God forgave you once you repented of that. But there's certain things you're still going to have to go through.
Right. But the flip side of that there may be someone who does not know the Lord and they're using this as a means of birth control. Well, then us as believers are to continue to love them, share with them, minister to them,
Yes.
so that their heart will change. We may not ever know that they had that abortion, but as we begin to sow that seed and plant in them, that will bring about that change, and then that will bring about repentance. There may be a believer who had an abortion and knew they were wrong, and no one ever knows about it, but then they realized what they did was wrong. But however, to overturn Roe versus Wade, and you have these circumstances of that 10-year-old being raped, or that woman with that health issue who has to choose between life or death. Those situations, and that should be a reevaluation of what's going on in that situation before you just totally wipe out something altogether. And then it really could be harmful to a lot of people. And how do we not know that that may not be a believer who has that what is it, ectopic pregnancy,
Yeah.
that you clearly will die from if you try to carry a baby for 9 months,
Yeah.
okay, or have that cancer, and then they're put on the platform to make a choice. And
what about women that use abortion as a method of birth control because they just don't know any better? They
Exactly.
haven't been taught anything differently.
Exactly.
They don't have proper health care, and I'm pregnant, I have to get an abortion.
Right.
Because they don't know any better. Nobody taught them anything different.
Yeah, and that's what they're pushing, like, even when it comes to, like, defund Planned Parenthood. And I would tell, like, when I was in college and I had gotten past my parents' insurance, I went to Planned Parenthood in order to get my yearly exams. They do more besides just promoting abortion. That was my experience with
Yeah.
them. You see what I'm saying? So, women that don't necessarily have insurance, Planned Parenthood has been there for them to provide the birth control for free, to provide the women's health and education. So the aspect of abortions they do is not their major aspect. It's women's health care. But all you see is defund Planned Parenthood. They are for abortion. So that's what's out there. But then you think about it, if you defund all of Planned Parenthood, you have a group of women that do not have health care, that are not getting the health care that they need, because you defunded a whole organization based on abortion.
Exactly. Because it's in the title, Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
Right.
It's not just about abortion.
Yes.
It's
Because
planning.
if you plan it,
it's planning.
Yes, exactly.
So clearly, listeners, as you hear us talk about this Roe versus Wade, we're all in agreement that we're not for abortion in terms of using it as a means of birth control. We all three, I can agree that we disagree with that.
Yes.
But what we are saying is that they may want to revisit that overturn, because there are a lot of circumstances that may, in terms of even health issues, may be necessary, not just for abortion like they're making it, but Planned Parenthood, to be able to be responsible and take care of yourselves.
Yes.
And I'm gonna just say that I might be saying this wrong, but I saw a post where they said, someone posted and said, "So you're saying that I can't claim my unborn child on my income tax because you're saying it's not a person yet, but it's a person and I can't get an abortion." You know what I'm saying? It's sort of
Right.
like a contradiction.
Exactly.
It is.
It is.
So you're saying, okay, I'm pregnant, I can't claim this person that you saying that's in my body on my taxes. You know, I can't claim them because now they're not a person. But then they're a person when it's time to get an abortion.
Yes.
And they say that that law is true.
Yeah, and it is. It is.
is
And
a
it's such a double standard, you know, with it. And then that's what I said about like pro life. We have such a disdain even for life itself, but you want to make it seem like, you know, oh, we're protecting the babies and things like that, but we're not protecting life. We had this past year we had the most school shootings that we've had in history. We've had so many things that have happened to our children. We've had the cutting of fundamental care for our children, for our babies, and protection for them. So we're not trying to protect their life. We're just trying to this one issue of
Protect
birth.
our agenda.
Yes, and that's really what it is. It's
So
more
it's
of an
so
agenda
it's a manipulation game.
than it is really that's what you're out for. You know, it's really that control over that. I want to have that say so over my agenda.
Yes.
But overall, I really don't care about the life of that child.
And that's sad.
And that's
sad.
really overall, because if you're not trying to carry that child throughout the life, then you're not pro-life. You're just
Right,
pro-birth.
right,
You want to
right.
just push that I want to control when you give birth. And if you get pregnant, I want to make sure that you give birth.
Control
I don't
birth,
wanna-
and what happens after that, good luck.
Good luck. And
Right.
then even from the birthing standpoint, you don't want to provide adequate health care. You don't want to make sure that that they have adequate means. You have impoverished areas where you don't have women's health care, and especially, we are 3 African American women. The mortality rate for the children that are born through African American women is the highest. Because of us, because of the health care that is provided to African American women regarding giving birth. I remember even when I was giving birth to my son, I have an African American doctor, and she works out of a office in Southfield and in Novi. And when I told her I wanted to go to the Novi location because it was closer to me, she indicated that she needed to call to the hospital and let them know that I was her patient. And I asked her why. She said, because they will treat you differently if you just came off the street and was about to give birth.
And
Which
you know
let me
that's
know,
true. You know
just
it's
let
true.
me know
And it's the
that,
truth.
which
It's
which
true.
means that, if I was someone off the street, that it would have been more likely that because I was, 36 when I was giving birth, because I was already considered high risk because I was over 35. So which means that it would have been more likely that I would have had more complications had I not, and they would have not have been as attentive. But she had to let them know. I mean, they were on it with her. They were like, we're reporting to your doctor and things like that. But I realized that, how scary that would have been for someone who doesn't necessarily, they may have not been married. They may have been a single person that just decided that they wanted to just have a baby. And then this hospital was closest to them. And they were treated a certain type of way
Can't
just
come
because
here.
they came out, just because they came to give birth, But that is a real thing that happened that we deal with when it comes to, and somebody making a decision where a doctor won't have to make a decision. What if they have to make a split decision to say whether, right now it could be a quick diagnosis where it's life or death for you. And the doctor has to think in the back of their mind, if they abort this baby, that they may be criminally prosecuted.
Yes.
Like, think about that.
Yeah.
That's where we're coming to, where doctors may be criminally prosecuted if they have to make a decision where, it looks like, they can either save the mother or save the baby. And they say, well, I got to think about whether I'm going to save the mother because I may be criminally prosecuted, because if they proves that I intentionally did not do what I needed to do to save the baby, that I could be criminally prosecuted.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real issue that we're facing now with the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
Okay, so now when I sit and listen to you and I think about it more and more, what we should really pay attention to as well, I remember hearing one guy on a podcast saying that the politicians aren't the leaders, we are. So it's our determination to do our research and determine how we cast our votes. And then as I think about all of the different issues that are coming up, I think about where is the true win at? Because there is an underlying agenda for the Roe versus Wade. And I'm not taking anybody's side, but that's manipulation game.
Mhm.
That's manipulation
Okay.
game. When I think about what you were saying about when I said the truth about the taxes and the elimination of the middle class, and then just have the rich and the poor. Think about that. You know, who's winning in all of this?
Mhm.
Who's winning? Because based on how we make our decisions will determine our win. Now, as believers, true, we're to trust in God. And we read our word, and hopefully we do more than read the word. We actually are the word. We are the walking word. But we have an obligation and a responsibility here, because my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. What did he say in Proverbs? Show me a righteous ruler, and I will show you a happy people. Show me a wicked ruler, and you will be a miserable people. Okay, that's real. Then he also says in Matthew 5:13, we are the salt of the earth, the light of the world. So should we not, as kingdom and believers, have a responsibility? We have a role and responsibility in the political and the voting. So to sit here and say, "Oh well, I'm not gonna vote because ain't nothing gonna be no different." Yeah, okay. And you'll be running around here, either poor or rich. Which one are
Right,
you?
because the middle class
And it's just gonna be a whole lot of things. You need to look at it from a big picture standpoint and not take pieces of the pie and not be manipulated, because a lot of us are truly being manipulated. And when you hear the discussion and why they make the decisions that they make, is pure manipulation. And so I'm just going to put it out there like this: the politicians is trying to run game on us,
Yes.
and we need to be awake.
That's why
Okay,
you have to be knowledgeable.
and
Yes,
that's why
knowledge.
and he says he has he had Christian leaders that was in politics, Joseph, but then he had the wicked people too. So you need to pray to the Lord and ask him, where's your place in all of this, and where does he want you to stand with that? So I need you all to listen to part 1, because we talked about the roles and responsibilities. We talked about the roles of the Senate, the president. We talked about NATO versus neutral. We talked about democracy versus communism. We even talked about the increase of gas prices. We talked about a whole bunch of stuff in part 1. And we talking about, I think, enough, because we were over time, in part 2. All right. And so I encourage you all, because we're going to have to close out, but I encourage you all to please pay attention and listen. And Attorney Ricks Johnson has TV show that I can never TV show. Well, guess what, everybody? She gonna have a TV show before it's all over. In Jesus' name. She has a show that she's gonna be airing in on Facebook in September.
It's September, the first Thursday in September, the Attorney's TV show, and we are going to be covering strictly in the fall the elections. We're going to bring on some of our elected officials. We're going to just tackle these midterm elections. We're going to hear from these politicians, and we're going to get you so that way you all can tune in. So you can follow the Attorney's TV show on Facebook, and we'll be airing it on Facebook, YouTube, and on all your podcast stations as well. It's under the Attorney's TV show.
Yeah, and
Congratulations.
I just want to say another thing too. You know how we were going back and forth and having conversation about the Roe versus Wade. It's a whole lot more going on right now in this country about issues that we may not agree with. But as believers, our whole job is to love on any and everything that we don't even agree with in prayer, that we're able to sow that seed and minister to that person or that experience in hopes that it will draw them nigh unto God, and God will make the ultimate decision as to whether he's going to draw them near, right? Right? And so now I got Sister Lisa here, and praise the Lord, she's here, and she said some stuff. She didn't expect to have to come here and be on this, but
Well, we're glad she's
very
here.
valuable to the community. Okay, so share what you do, please.
I'm a probation officer with the state of Michigan, Michigan Department of Corrections. Been a probation officer for nearly 22 years.
Okay, so see, we got a Christian probation officer. Check
Yes,
that out. Okay,
yes. They
So
are.
she go-
They are out there.
Yes. So she's going to tread that
few of
state
us,
near
a
us.
few of
She
us.
do her thing. So listen, everybody, I'm going to close with these 4 ways to participate in your voting. Vote. It is our responsibility to be informed voters, to seek God's leadership, to actually vote and encourage others to do the same. Engage. Your elected officials need to hear from you. They want to hear from you. You would be surprised with how few people take the time just to pre-pen an email, call, or let your voice be heard. We can use our voice. Serve. We need voters of faith. We also need leaders of faith. Is God calling you to an elected office? Are you asking him to make his desires known to you and to others? And then intercede. We are to pray for our leaders whether we agree with them or not. In fact, the less we agree, the more we should intercede. We should pray for all leaders. Do you know the names of your city council? Are you praying for them? And for your mayor, for your governor, your state officials, for your president and your cabinet and his cabinet. So I'm going to say to you that you need to rock that vote on September 8th, 2022. And thank you. And I'm going to close out again with another one of my husband's songs, because guess what? I love that man. Peace.
Time waits for no one. So remember, everything has its time, and to everything there is a season. A time for every purpose and for every work under heaven. It's the Crying Prophet's time now. Tell them what time it is.
There once was a time we had to fight segregation, but now it's time to win the battle. Free our minds of people from incarceration. There's a time to hide from the cameras and a time to be photogenic. A time to expose the picture, show everything in it. There's a time to confess and a time to deny. Even a time for the shadow to fall out the sky. There's a time to reach a final destination. A time to get understanding while incarcerated. A time to be justified and a time to return to dust. A time to follow basic instincts and a time to trust. There's a time to pass the torch and a time to run the ball. 4 inches, a time to choke or execute the call. There's a time to be concerned, put out the fire and a time to let it burn.
There's a time to live, a time to die, a time to laugh, a time to cry, a time to wait, a time to rush, a time to talk, a time to hush, a time to think, a time to pray, a time to spend, a time to make. But look here, if you think you got time to hate, then you're wasting your time and wasting my time for real.
There's a time to fight and a time to retreat. A time to stay at home and a time to run the streets. There's a time to speak your mind and a time to bite your tongue. A time to pull up your jeans, a time to run. There's a time to get out the game, put down the guns. A time to open your eyes, follow the sun. There's a time to get money, hustle on the block. A time to get a job, punch the clock. There's a time to understand and a time to be confused. A time to win, a time to lose. A time to keep it secret and a time to spread the news. There's a time to go to sleep and a time to get put to rest. A time for raw dogging, a time for safe sex. A time to get cursed and a time to be blessed. There's a time to please and a time to get disappointed. A time to rejoice, a time to be anointed.
A time for pain, a time to thug, a time for gain, a time to grow, a time to teach, a time to know, a time to preach, a time to pay, a time for cake, a time to give, a time to take. But look here, if you think you got time to hate, then you're wasting your time and wasting my time for real.
Do you know what time it is? And I'm not talking about the time on the clock. There's a time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. There's a time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. stones. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to gain and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to throw away. There's a time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. There's a time of war and a time of peace. A time to meditate on Ecclesiastes 3. There's a time for everything, and time keeps on ticking.